This week's episode of Star Wars Rebels was titled The Wynkahthu Job. Hondo approaches the crew of the Ghost with a heist on an abandoned Imperial freighter said to be loaded with proton bombs and treasures untold. Despite their lack of trust for him, they agree to help. By the way, Hondo's repainted Imperial shuttle looks pretty cool. Seeing the previews for the Wynkahthu Job, I was afraid it was going to be similar to last week's episode, The Iron Squadron. I feared it would be complete filler and have no relation to the rest of the season, and for the most part, I do think that's true. I think the same story could have been told in a more interesting way, but it was executed far better than Iron Squadron was, and I do think the elements from this story could reappear down the line. So while this wasn't my favorite episode, I don't think it was straight up bad, which is how I felt about Iron Squadron. The writing was much better. Hondo's jokes, which usually make me roll my eyes, still made me roll my eyes, but in like an "oh you" kind of way. His blind jokes to Kanan were pretty good. My biggest issue with the Wynkahthu Job is that it all felt kind of pointless. Outside of the rebels now having a large stash of proton bombs, what else changed for them? The big lessons that were set up for Ezra to learn were about accepting orders from Zeb and seeing that Hondo is not a great friend to have. But I just feel like Ezra didn't learn anything. He did seem to gain some new respect for Zeb by the end, but their relationship will probably be back to the big brother-little brother dynamic next week. And Ezra still seemed totally amused by Hondo in the final scene, after he attempted to leave his Ugnaught friend to die. Speaking of those Ugnaughts, it's barely addressed, but Hondo got 2 of them killed. At the end of Steps into Shadow, he had 3, and now he's down to 1. And there was just barely a mention of how he left his crew to die. I just don't understand why Ezra is so amused by him. But let's talk about the Imperial sentry droids. From the Season 3 trailer, I guessed that we'd be seeing a story inspired by the Dark Troopers from the Star Wars Legends game Dark Forces. Well, now I hope that's not what we just got. While the sentry droid design did seem to be somewhat inspired by the Dark Trooper, they didn't do enough to earn that title. They could soak up damage, but they weren't scary enough. Dark Troopers are supposed to be terrifying and brutal. They're not used to guard cargo. The sentry droids were way overpowered for that job, but it's looking like we won't be getting an official Dark Trooper storyline in Rebels, at least not for now. Unless seeing them in this episode is setting them up for future appearances. I will say that in the past, Rebels has been pretty good at taking their more fillery episodes and tying them into the main plot. I definitely think the proton bombs will come back into play. Maybe the sentry droids will too. But why would the Empire all of a sudden use sentry droids in a more aggressive role? I don't know. All in all, it wasn't a terrible episode, but I feel like it just didn't live up to its potential. Instead of sentry droids, the freighter could have had an experimental Imperial weapon on board. When the Ghost crew got there, maybe they would see the rest of Hondo's crew taken out, and then the Dark Troopers would activate, kill some red shirts, and actually be scary. It could play out in a similar way with the freighter crashing, but everyone would be nervous about this new type of battle droid, and it would come back to the story down the line, and they would be a big deal to face again. Next week's episode is called An Inside Man. Ezra and Kanan are going to sneak into an Imperial weapons factory to investigate a new weapon. Originally, I thought that would be the Dark Trooper. The Wynkahthu Job could have been their introduction, and then next week would have been destroying the factory they came from, like a very condensed version of Dark Forces. That's how I would have liked to see it handled. I guess that's still possible, but I doubt it. The sentry droids just weren't treated with enough importance. If you can't tell, I was really hoping those droids would be Dark Troopers, but oh well. I get the feeling next week will be a much more important episode to the season, and could possibly tie into Rogue One a bit as we near the mid-season finale. What did you guys think of the episode? I'd really like to know how someone unfamiliar with the Dark Troopers felt about it. Let me know in the comments, and you can check out my other Rebels reviews right here. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and consider checking out my Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.